Picture this. You're sitting in your assigned seat, minding your own business, when someone accuses you of stealing their spot. The flight crew believes them, not you. Security is called. You're about to be thrown off the plane. But here's the twist no one saw coming. You own the airline. This is the true story of the woman in seat 3A and how one moment of discrimination sparked a revolution that changed an entire industry. What happened next will make you rethink everything you know about power, silence, and justice. What happens when the person you try to humiliate turns out to own the very ground you stand on? Let me tell you about a Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. Maria Garcia sat in seat 3A, business class, flight 447 to Miami. The leather beneath her was soft, expensive, the kind of comfort that whispers rather than shouts. She dressed simply that day, a navy blazer, minimal jewelry, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Nothing about her screamed wealth. Nothing about her demanded attention. And that, as it turned out, was exactly the point. She was reading Forbes magazine, absorbed in an article about leadership in crisis, when she heard it. The sound. A perfectly manicured hand, nails painted crimson red, rings glittering on 3 fingers, slammed down on the armrest beside her. The impact echoed through the quiet cabin like a judge's gavel. "Excuse me," a voice said, sharp and impatient. "But I think you're in my seat." Maria looked up slowly. The woman standing over her was maybe 35, blonde hair styled in expensive waves, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head. Her name was Sophia, though Maria wouldn't learn that until later. What Maria noticed immediately was the sweat on Sophia's forehead despite the cool cabin air, the agitation in her movements, the crumpled boarding pass she was waving like a weapon. "Seat 3A, Sophia said louder, jabbing at the paper. "This is my seat. You're in my seat." Now, here's where most people would have responded immediately. Pulled out their boarding pass, shown their ticket, defended themselves with words and proof and rising voices. But Maria Garcia hadn't become who she was by being like most people. She said nothing. She simply looked at Sophia with calm, dark eyes and returned her gaze to her magazine. That silence, that calculated, intentional silence, it was a choice. Not weakness. Not submission. A choice. And it landed on Sophia like gasoline on a flame. "Are you listening to me?" Sophia's voice climbed an octave. "I said you're in my seat. This is business class. You need to move. Now." A few rows back, a passenger named Leo had been scrolling through his phone, half asleep before his flight. But something about the tone in Sophia's voice made him look up. Something about the way this was unfolding felt wrong, felt familiar in an ugly way. He quietly raised his phone and started recording. Other passengers were noticing now, too. Heads turning. Whispers starting. The cabin was filling with that particular tension that comes when strangers sense conflict brewing, when they have to decide whether to look away or lean in. Maria still hadn't said a word. She turned another page of her magazine, her face a mask of composed neutrality. But inside, she was watching everything. Every assumption, every microaggression, every reveal of character happening right in front of her. "Hello? Hello?" Sophia was practically shouting now, her face flushing red. "Can someone help me here? This woman is in my seat and she's refusing to move. She probably can't even afford to be in business class." There it was. The thing that had been hovering unspoken in the air, finally said out loud. The assumption that had been there from the very first moment, now crystallized into words that couldn't be taken back. The other passengers stirred uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others looked at Maria with a mixture of pity and curiosity. A businessman across the aisle cleared his throat, uncomfortable but saying nothing. A mother pulled her daughter closer, whispering something about minding their own business. That's when the gate agent arrived. His name was David, and he walked onto that plane with the confident stride of someone who'd handled 1,000 boarding disputes before. He was 42, 15 years with the airline, and he thought he knew exactly what was happening here. He'd made up his mind before he even heard both sides of the story. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, but his body language had already chosen a side. He angled himself towards Sophia. The louder voice, the more aggressive presence. The one who looked like she belonged. Finally, Sophia exhaled dramatically. This woman is in my seat. I've been trying to get her to move for 5 minutes. She won't even respond to me. Look, seat 3A, right here on my boarding pass. That's my seat, and she's just sitting there like she owns the place. The irony of that statement would become apparent soon enough. David turned to Maria. Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass, please? Maria looked up at him. She took in his posture, his tone, the unconscious bias written in every line of his body. She made a mental note of it, filed it away with all the other observations she'd been collecting since Sophia's hand hit that armrest. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and handed it to him without a word. David examined it, his brow furrowing. This also says 3A. He looked between the two boarding passes, confusion replacing confidence. There must be a system error. Ma'am, he turned back to Maria. I'm going to have to ask you to step into the aisle while we sort this out. Are you kidding me? Sophia exploded. Why does SHE get to stay seated while we figure this out? I was here first. Well, I would have been here first if she hadn't taken my seat. This is ridiculous. More phones were coming out now. Leo wasn't the only one recording. The story was already spreading through that cabin like wildfire, whispered between couples, texted to friends waiting at the gate. Everyone could feel it. Something significant was happening, though no one yet understood what. David radioed for backup. We've got a seating dispute in business class 3A. Need the captain's assistance. Maria finally closed her magazine. Slowly, deliberately. She placed it in the seat pocket in front of her and folded her hands in her lap. Still, she said nothing. But there was something in her stillness now, something that made a few of the more observant passengers lean forward with sudden interest. Captain Evans arrived, his uniform crisp, his expression already tired. He was 63 years from retirement, and he did not have time for this. He'd been briefed by David over the radio, and he'd already decided how this was going to go. Ladies, he said with forced patience, we have a full flight, and we're already behind schedule. We have 2 boarding passes for the same seat, which means our system made an error. Ma'am, he looked directly at Maria. I'm going to have to ask you to deplane so we can get this sorted out at the gate. We'll get you on the next available flight to Miami. The cabin went silent. Everyone was watching now. Even the crew members who'd been preparing for takeoff had stopped to observe. Sophia's face broke into a triumphant smile, and Maria Garcia finally stood up. But she didn't step into the aisle to leave. Instead, she reached for her briefcase in the overhead compartment. It was leather, expensive but understated, the kind of quality that doesn't need logos. She placed it on her seat and opened it with a soft click that somehow carried through the entire cabin. Everyone watched as she pulled out a single document, a piece of paper that would change everything. The video went viral in 3 hours. Leo had posted it from the plane before they'd even reached cruising altitude, his hands still shaking slightly as he typed the caption. By the time Flight 447 touched down in Miami, his phone had blown up with notifications. Hundreds, then thousands, then so many that his device started lagging. The numbers climbed impossibly fast. 10,000 views. 50,000. 100,000. By midnight, it had crossed 2 million. By morning, it was trending on every social media platform, dissected on cable news, debated on talk radio, and analyzed in think pieces across the internet. Boss owns airline, destroys Karen in seat dispute, read one headline. The most satisfying takedown of 2025, declared another. But those headlines, Maria thought as she sat in her home office that evening, missed the point entirely. She watched her phone light up with call after call, producers from morning shows, reporters from major newspapers, podcast hosts, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted an interview. Everyone wanted her story. Everyone wanted the moment of triumph, the viral vindication, the satisfying spectacle of justice served. Maria declined them all. Because this wasn't about going viral. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation or her personal satisfaction. This was about something much bigger. She opened her laptop and began to write. Not a press statement. Not a social media post, but a comprehensive proposal for systemic change, the document that would become the Dignity in Flight initiative. She worked through the night, fueled by decades of experience, years of planning, and the crystallized purpose that came from finally having the platform to make real change. Because here's what those viral headlines didn't know. Maria had been planning this for years. Let me take you back so you understand why that moment in seat 3A mattered so much. Maria Elena Garcia was born in a small town in Mexico, the daughter of a seamstress and a mechanic. She was 7 years old when her family immigrated to the United States, crossing the border with nothing but 2 suitcases and a prayer that life could be different, could be better. She still remembered her first day of school in America, how the other kids had laughed at her accent, how the teacher had spoken slowly and loudly as if volume could bridge the language gap, how she'd felt invisible and hypervisible at the same time. She remembered her mother cleaning houses for wealthy families, coming home exhausted, her hands raw from chemicals. She remembered her father working 3 jobs, his mechanic skill undervalued because his English wasn't perfect. But Maria? Maria learned English in 6 months. She graduated top of her class. She got a full scholarship to business school, then an MBA from Stanford. She worked in finance, then consulting, then started her own investment firm. And all along the way, she collected moments. Moments like the one on Flight 447. The time a client assumed she was the secretary, not the CEO. The time security followed her around a luxury store while ignoring white shoppers. The time a flight attendant asked to see her boarding pass 3 times while never questioning the white passengers around her. The time she was told she didn't look like a business owner. The time. Each moment she filed away, not with bitterness, but with careful observation. She studied the systems that allowed these moments to happen. She analyzed the unconscious biases, the structural inequalities, the way power perpetuated itself by deciding who belonged and who didn't. And she made a plan. At 35, her investment firm was thriving. She'd made her first fortune. And she started quietly acquiring shares in the airline, the very airline where she'd experienced some of her most painful moments of discrimination. It took her 7 years of patient, strategic buying, using shell companies and complex financial instruments to avoid detection. By the time she was 42, she owned 51% of the company. And then she started her audits. She'd fly commercial, unannounced, dress simply, observing how passengers were treated, how gate agents made assumptions, how crew members showed unconscious bias, how the system protected some people while leaving others vulnerable. She'd been doing this for 3 months when Sophia's hand hit that armrest in seat 3A. That's why Maria had stayed so calm. That's why she'd let the situation escalate. Because she needed it documented. She needed the full scope of the problem visible, undeniable, impossible to dismiss. She'd been waiting for this moment. And when it came, she was ready. 6 weeks after the video went viral, Maria stood in the airline's main boardroom facing the executive leadership team. The room was tense. These were people who'd built their careers in the old system, who were comfortable with the way things had always been, who saw change as threat rather than opportunity. The Dignity in Flight initiative will cost approximately $47 million in the first year, Maria said, her presentation displayed on the screen behind her. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all 12,000 employees. New passenger protection policies with independent review boards. Anonymous reporting systems. Diverse hiring initiatives at every level of the organization. And, critically, tying promotions and bonuses to measurable inclusion metrics. Michael Chun, the CFO, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maria, with all due respect, that's a significant expense. Our margins are already tight. The industry is competitive. Is this really the time? Is this the time? Maria interrupted, her voice sharp. Michael, let me show you what discrimination actually costs this company. She clicked to the next slide. Numbers filled the screen, cold, hard data. We lose an estimated $200 million annually to discrimination-related issues. Lawsuits that settle quietly. Customer churn from negative experiences. Employees who leave because of hostile work environments. Talent we failed to recruit because our reputation precedes us. Regulatory fines. PR disasters. She paused. And that's just what we can quantify. What about the innovation we lose because diverse voices aren't at the table? What about the markets we fail to reach because we don't understand them? What about the human cost, the passengers we traumatize, the employees we fail to protect? She clicked again. Now the screen showed footage from Leo's video. Sophia's face twisted in anger, David unconsciously siding with her, Captain Evans preparing to remove Maria from the plane. This video has been viewed 47 million times. 47 million people have watched our employees make assumptions, show bias, and nearly remove a passenger, who happened to be me, from her seat. 47 million people now associate this airline with discrimination. The room was silent. Or, Maria continued, her voice softening slightly, 47 million people could watch us become the first airline to take real, meaningful action to address these issues. We could become the industry leader in inclusion. We could attract the best talent, the most loyal customers, the strongest partnerships. We could prove that doing the right thing is also good business. She looked around the room, meeting each executive's eyes. The question isn't whether we can afford to do this. The question is whether we can afford not to. Robert Patterson, the COO, spoke up. He was 58, old guard, and Maria had expected the most resistance from him. I've been with this airline for 30 years, he said slowly. And I'll be honest, Maria. My first instinct is to say this is too much, too fast. But I watched that video, and I saw myself in Captain Evans. I've made those same assumptions. I've sided with a louder voice without checking facts. And it makes me sick to realize it. His voice cracked slightly. My daughter is marrying a black man next year. They've told me stories about flying while black, the extra scrutiny, the assumptions, the microaggressions. I defended the industry. I said they were being too sensitive. He shook his head. But I was wrong. And if we have the chance to fix this, to actually make it better for people like my future son-in-law, for everyone who's been made to feel like they don't belong, then we have to take it. Maria nodded, respect in her eyes. Thank you, Robert. One by one, the other executives came around. Some were moved by moral arguments, others by financial data. Some, Maria suspected, were simply reading the room and choosing the winning side. She didn't care about their motivations. She cared about results. The initiative passed unanimously. The real work began the next day. Maria hired Dr. Jennifer Washington, one of the country's leading experts on unconscious bias, to design the training program. Not a one-hour video that employees could sleep through. Real, intensive, uncomfortable training that would force people to confront their own assumptions. Make them cry, Maria told Dr. Washington at their first meeting. Make them uncomfortable. Make them see themselves in that video. Because comfortable people don't change. The training was mandatory starting from the top. Maria herself sat through the first session along with the entire executive team. For 3 days, they unpacked their biases, shared their own experiences of discrimination and privilege, and worked through scenarios that had no easy answers. Captain Evans was in that first session. He was quiet for most of it, but on the second day, during an exercise where participants had to share a time they'd experienced or witnessed discrimination, he broke down. I removed a teenager from a flight once, he said, his voice thick with emotion. 5 years ago. Kid was wearing a hoodie, headphones, not responding quickly when I spoke to him. I thought he was being disrespectful. Turned out he was autistic and the headphones were noise-canceling for sensory issues. His mother was in the bathroom. By the time I realized my mistake, I'd already traumatized that kid and humiliated his family in front of a full plane. He looked at Maria. I never apologized. I didn't even file a report. I just moved on because I told myself I was following protocol. But I wasn't following protocol. I was following my own biases about what a problem passenger looks like. What would you do differently now? Dr. Washington asked gently. Everything, Captain Evans said. I'd ask questions first. I'd be patient. I'd remember that every passenger has a story I don't know. I'd treat them the way I'd want my own kids treated. By the end of the 3 days, everyone in that room was different. Not perfect, not suddenly free of all bias, but aware, accountable, willing to do better. The training rolled out across the entire organization over 6 months. Every pilot, every flight attendant, every gate agent, every customer service representative, everyone who touched passengers' experiences. David, the gate agent from Flight 447, threw himself into the training with an almost desperate intensity. He volunteered to be part of the pilot program, helped refine the curriculum, and eventually became a trainer himself, sharing his own story of how unconscious bias had nearly cost him his career. "I thought I was a good person," he told new trainees in his sessions. "I thought I didn't see color, didn't make assumptions. But when I watched the video of myself on that plane, I saw the truth. I saw how I'd position my body toward the white woman. How I'd question the Latina woman's boarding pass, but not the white woman's. How I'd made up my mind about who belonged before I'd even heard both sides. It was ugly. It was shameful. But it was real. And you have to see your own reality before you can change it." But training was just the beginning. Maria established the Passenger Dignity Board, an independent body of diverse community members who reviewed complaints of discrimination. Passengers could now report incidents anonymously through an app, and every report was investigated by people outside the company's normal chain of command. The board had real power. They could mandate additional training, suspend employees, or recommend termination. They published quarterly reports on trends, problem areas, and progress. Everything was transparent. The airline also implemented new hiring initiatives. Maria set targets. Within 3 years, leadership should reflect the diversity of their customer base. They partnered with historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, and organizations supporting LGBTQ+ professionals. They eliminated degree requirements for many positions, recognizing that talent comes in many forms. They changed their promotion criteria. Managers weren't just evaluated on profits or efficiency anymore. Inclusion became part of every performance review. Did you mentor diverse talent? Did you create an environment where everyone felt safe speaking up? Did you catch and correct bias when you saw it? Some managers thrived under the new system. Others, who'd risen through favoritism and old boy networks, suddenly found themselves accountable. A few resigned. Many more adapted. And gradually, month by month, the culture began to shift. 6 months after Flight 447, Maria boarded another plane. Same route. Same seat, 3A. But everything else was different. The gate agent who checked her boarding pass was a young Black woman named Jasmine. She smiled warmly at Maria, checked her ID, and said, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Garcia. We're honored to have you flying with us today." No suspicion. No extra scrutiny. Just professional courtesy. As Maria walked down the jetway, she noticed the posters on the walls. New signage about the airline's commitment to dignity and respect. Photos of diverse crew members. A QR code linking to the anonymous reporting system. The flight attendant who greeted her at the door was wearing a rainbow pin, part of the airline's new policy allowing employees to express their identities safely. "Welcome aboard," he said with genuine warmth. "Let me help you with that bag." Maria settled into seat 3A and pulled out her tablet. She was reading the latest quarterly report from the Passenger Dignity Board when someone stopped at her row. "Excuse me," a voice said. Maria looked up. A young man, maybe 25, was checking his boarding pass. "I think I might be in. Oh wait, no, I'm 3B. Sorry about that." He smiled apologetically and took the seat next to her. No drama. No assumptions. Just a simple human interaction, the way it should always have been. As the plane filled up, Maria observed everything with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years studying systems. She watched how the crew greeted passengers, how they offered assistance, how they handled a passenger with mobility issues with patience and dignity. She watched how a family speaking Spanish was treated exactly the same as an English-speaking businessman. She watched how a Muslim woman wearing a hijab was welcomed aboard without extra scrutiny. Small moments, Mundane interactions. Exactly as they should be. This, Maria thought, is what success looks like. Not viral videos or headlines, but ordinary dignity, extended to everyone, every day. The impact rippled far beyond one airline. Leo's video, which he'd later licensed to be used in the airline's training materials, with all proceeds going to racial justice organizations, became a case study in business schools across the country. Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. They all taught the Flight 447 case, analyzing Maria's strategic patience, her systematic approach to change, her use of moral authority combined with business acumen. Other airlines began adopting similar policies. Some did it because they believed in it. Others did it because Maria's airline was eating their lunch. Customer satisfaction scores had skyrocketed, employee retention had improved dramatically, and the company's reputation as an inclusive employer was attracting top talent from across the industry. The Dignity in Flight framework was adapted for hotels, retail, healthcare, and education. Dr. Washington's training program was licensed to hundreds of organizations. Maria's patient, systematic approach to addressing systemic bias became a model studied and replicated worldwide. But perhaps most importantly, the video sparked conversations at dinner tables across the country. Parents showed it to their children and talked about assumptions and respect. Teachers used it in classrooms to discuss discrimination. Companies screened it in diversity training. People who'd never thought much about unconscious bias suddenly saw it clearly, undeniably, in Sophia's face and David's body language and Captain Evans's quick judgment. Maria received thousands of messages, emails, letters, social media posts from people sharing their own stories. The Latina mother who'd been removed from a flight for suspicious behavior while traveling with her children. The Black businessman constantly asked if he was in the right section. The Asian American doctor mistaken for a service worker. The Indigenous woman made to feel like an intruder in first class. So many stories. So much pain. So much injustice that had been invisible to those who didn't experience it. But now it was visible, undeniable, and more importantly, addressable. 1 year after Flight 447, Maria stood at a podium at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. She'd been invited to speak about the Dignity in Flight initiative and its broader implications for social justice. She looked out at the audience, activists, business leaders, students, journalists. People who'd been fighting these battles for decades, and people just waking up to them. "A year ago," Maria began, "I was sitting quietly in seat 3A, and a woman made an assumption about me. That assumption led to an incident that went viral, sparked a national conversation, and became a catalyst for change. But here's what I want you to understand. I was only able to turn that moment into meaningful change because I had power. I owned the airline. I had resources. I had a platform." She paused, letting that sink in. What about everyone else? What about all the people who experience discrimination but don't own the company? Who don't have lawyers or platforms or millions of dollars? Whose moments of injustice aren't captured on video and don't go viral? What happens to them? The room was silent, attentive. That's why we can't rely on viral moments or individual acts of heroism. We need systemic change. We need policies with teeth. We need accountability structures. We need to change the systems that allow discrimination to flourish so that people don't need power or privilege to be treated with dignity. She clicked to a slide showing data from the past year: decreases in discrimination complaints, increases in customer satisfaction across all demographic groups, improvements in employee diversity and retention. This is what happens when we take systemic issues seriously. When we invest in real training, create real accountability, and give people real power to report problems without fear of retaliation. When we tie inclusion to performance metrics and promotions. When we make it clear that dignity is non-negotiable. She looked directly at the business leaders in the audience. And for those of you worried about the cost, we're more profitable now than we were a year ago. We're attracting better talent. We're reaching new markets. We're building customer loyalty that money can't buy. Doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's good business. After her speech, a young Latina woman approached her. She couldn't have been more than 20. Ms. Garcia, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I just want to say thank you. I'm a business student, and I've spent so much of my life trying to fit in, trying to be less myself, so people would take me seriously. But watching what you did, seeing how you used your power for good, it made me realize I don't have to shrink. I can be powerful and still be myself. I can succeed without abandoning where I come from. Maria's eyes filled with tears. This, she thought. This is why it matters. What's your name? Maria asked. Sophia, the young woman said. Maria smiled at the irony. A different Sophia. A better outcome. Sophia, Maria said, taking her hand, the world needs your voice. Your perspective. Your power. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. And when you have power, and you will, use it wisely. Use it to open doors for others. 2 years after Flight 447, Maria was back in Seat 3A again. She still conducted audits, though they were less frequent now. The culture had changed so dramatically that most flights were uneventful, which was exactly the point. This time, she wasn't reading Forbes. She was looking at something else, a framed photograph that sat on her home office desk. It was the boarding pass from that day, Seat 3A, Flight 447, preserved behind glass. Below it, a small plaque with a quote she'd chosen carefully. Power is not just what you have, but what you do with it. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Maria looked around the cabin. A diverse crew working together seamlessly. Passengers of every background settling in comfortably. A little Latina girl across the aisle, maybe 8 years old, confidently pulling out her iPad in the business class seat her parents had bought her. The girl caught Maria looking and smiled. Maria smiled back, seeing herself at that age, full of dreams, not yet aware of all the barriers she'd face, not yet knowing she'd have the power to change them. The plane lifted off, leaving the ground behind. Maria closed her eyes and thought about silence, about strategy, about the long game of change. She thought about Sofia Martinez, banned from the airline, now an unwitting symbol in training videos about the cost of assumptions. She thought about Captain Evans, now one of the airline's strongest advocates for inclusion, mentoring young pilots of color. She thought about David, the gate agent turned trainer, teaching others to see their own biases. She thought about Leo, whose decision to record had created accountability when it mattered most. She thought about all the passengers who'd fly today, tomorrow, next year, who would never know that their simple dignity, their right to be treated with respect, had been fought for and won by a quiet woman in Seat 3A who'd refused to accept anything less. Systemic change doesn't happen in viral moments. It happens in the quiet work that follows. In the policies and training and accountability structures. In the daily choices of thousands of people who decide to do better. But sometimes, viral moments help. Sometimes, one woman's silence becomes a revolution. Sometimes, Seat 3A becomes a symbol. And sometimes, slowly, carefully, persistently, the world becomes a little more just. 3 years after Flight 447, the airline ran a commercial during the Super Bowl. It featured real employees and real passengers, people of every background, telling their stories. The final shot was simple. An empty airplane cabin, peaceful and quiet, with just the seats visible. The voiceover said, "Everyone deserves a seat at the table. Everyone deserves dignity in flight. Everyone belongs." The camera focused on one seat in particular, 3A, as the screen faded to black. Maria watched that commercial from her living room, surrounded by her team from the Dignity in Flight initiative. They'd come so far. Changed so much. But there was still work to do. There would always be work to do. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Washington. 5 more companies just signed up for the training. The movement is spreading. Maria smiled and typed back. Good. Let's keep going. Because that's the thing about real change. It's not a moment. It's not a viral video or a satisfying takedown or a perfect Hollywood ending. It's a commitment. A process. 1,000 small decisions every day to choose dignity over comfort, accountability over convenience, justice over expediency. It's understanding that power without compassion is tyranny, but compassion without power is just sentiment. It's knowing when to be silent and when to speak, when to wait and when to act, when to hold your cards and when to reveal your hand. Maria Garcia learned all of this in her journey from that small town in Mexico to Seat 3A. And she'd used every lesson to build something that would outlast any viral moment, a system that protected people, changed minds, and proved that the arc of justice doesn't just bend toward fairness. Sometimes, if you're strategic enough, patient enough, powerful enough, and care enough, you can bend it yourself. In the end, Maria Garcia didn't just win a seat on a plane. She changed the entire airline. And in doing so, she showed us all that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't always the loudest, it's the most strategic. Real change doesn't happen in viral moments. It happens in the patient, persistent work that follows. One seat, one policy, one training session, one changed mind at a time.